Hi, good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining me. Today, we're going to deal with censorship, and largely because Facebook has been forced to apologize about COVID-19 censorship. This is a serious issue. The question is, what have they learned? What have other platforms learned? And more importantly, what have the people who have been censored from positions of expertise have to say about this? So, this is what we're going to cover today. And I've got with me two experts, Sean Kaufman and Jennifer Smith. I've both had both on previously. They're going to be sharing their insights with us and letting us know about some of the critical things that probably need to happen in the future. Thank you very much for joining us, both of you. And so I'll start with you, Jennifer. Can you do a quick introduction of yourself to the audience?
Sure, Philip. Thanks for having me back. It's always good to chat with you. So, I have a doctoral degree in microbiology and molecular cell sciences with subject matter expertise in virology, specifically respiratory viruses. So, I've spent a majority of my career working with influenza, but I've also worked with other respiratory viruses such as RSV and mumps. I've managed government contracts for vaccines. In a vaccine for testing Canada vaccines for hemorrhagic fever viruses. And then I shifted over to public health, where I worked as an epidemiologist at the Hawaii Department of Health. So I served on the front lines there, doing disease investigation, contact tracing throughout the pandemic. I spoke up against the lies and the COVID corruption there in Hawaii, and I was subsequently discharged from my position.
Wow, thank you very much, Jennifer. And Sean?
Well, Philip, it's great to join you again. It's good to see that you're doing well, and Jennifer, you as well. My name is Sean Kaufman. I'm CEO and founding partner of Safer Behaviors. My career spans 27 years in public health, primarily kind of working with and around the behaviors that individuals participate in as a result of coming in contact or being directly affected by an infectious disease. So it started many, many years ago in the state of California with HIV, and then I was very proud to work at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for over 5 years and was a guest researcher for an additional 2, where I worked with not only HIV/AIDS but also parasitic diseases that would pop up, and then starting in 2001, really jumped into emergency response with the September 11th attacks, the anthrax attacks. In 2003, the original SARS, West Nile virus, the first time it was making its way across the country, monkeypox, and then transitioned in 2004 to Emory University, where I not only served as a faculty member there teaching emergency response and public health, but also ran a 10-year grant with NIAID, that's Dr. Fauci's group, teaching people to work safely in high containment laboratory environments. That's actually where I got to meet Jennifer Smith, Dr. Smith, and so spanned the world for 10 years, teaching people to work in BSL-3, BSL-4 laboratories. And in 2014, helped manage the first 2 cases of treatment at Emory University. I took care of the doctors and nurses who were working in that environment with Dr. Kent Brantley and Nancy Ribel. And since 2014, have really been running our business, Safer Behaviors, and primarily working with multiple customers to teach them and to ensure that when they do work with and around dangerous infectious diseases, they work safely. So
Excellent, excellent. So listen, both of you guys were involved early in the context of the original SARS-CoV pandemic in 2003. And when the SARS-CoV-2 came out in 2019 or 2020, both of you found that you were largely sidelined with that expertise. Did it make any sense at all?
No, not from where I was sitting. So I think Hawaii was very lucky. Probably one of the only public health departments in the country that had a trained virologist specifically with respiratory viruses on staff. Very underpaid, by the way. And instead of, tapping me and using that expertise, like I was never involved in any meetings. I was never in, even though I was seen as the subject matter expert, I developed the case investigation protocol and all the case investigation questionnaires and contact tracing questionnaires, but I was never involved in any of the meetings. I was not tapped for the COVID response team. So it was very interesting. Even when I reached out to the lieutenant governor and asked to be on the COVID response team, crickets.
And what about you, Sean? And considering you as well had expertise, did you get any opportunity to input?
Well, Philip, it was very frustrating at that time. In fact, a lot of my sanity, I can't tell you the amount of time that Jennifer and I would talk about how amazed we were at what was happening. This was the first time in my 20, at that time was 25, 20, 24 years of serving in public health, that public health did not seem to be doing what was right for the general public. It seemed to be doing what was right for political narratives, for healthcare doctrines, and even for big pharma. And so a lot of scratching of heads, a lot of not understanding why we were doing what we were doing from the very get-go, where we were telling people to hide and telling them to stay in their houses, and to give up their educational opportunities, their employment, their really in essence their mental health. So a lot of things just, Philip, from the very beginning didn't make sense. And I sit today in a different position than I was back then. You know, I was angry, hurt. I'd even admit that probably I was even a little depressed. Being a public health professional, it's always been able to serve and be a voice for people. That was taken away. And so I look back on it now. I have to forgive. I have to give grace. I have to move forward. But I do look at the things, Philip, that I was able to participate in. And in fact, today is the 3rd year anniversary of one of those things. Grace Churches in Los Angeles, California, is celebrating their victory 3 years ago. They beat the state of California, Gavin Newsom, and all of the people who tried to block and ban churches from being open during COVID. They won their case. And not only did they win a sufficient amount of money, but they also won a promise that the state of California will never, ever again try to shut their churches down. And I think that was a huge victory. And that, again, was celebrated 3 years ago today.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that when you think about it now and you try and make sense of what was happening then, because both of your voices would have been not following the narrative, how early was it that you started to face censorship? Not even yet on social media, but just censorship in and around the work that you did.
So for me, when the testing first rolled out at the end of February of 2020, I immediately red flag went up because I knew, all the years, hundreds and hundreds of PCR assays that I have performed, designed PCR assays. My master's program was designing a PCR assay to differentiate field strains from vaccine strains of a respiratory virus. So I understand very well the principles behind PCR and the technique. And when I learned how this assay was being performed, I knew immediately that something was wrong. And I was like, they're going to have a lot of false positives. And maybe when you're in a public health crisis, erring on the side of caution may be good. So I kind of pushed that down, but I did bring it to the attention of the state epidemiologist. And I was like, there are some serious problems with this test. And there are people who are being made to isolate and quarantine unnecessarily. And when you think about the impacts that was having on people, when we talk about health, I'm sure I've mentioned this, taking a holistic approach to health, it's not just about one infectious disease. So when you talk about the impact of health, financial health, spiritual health, mental health, there are serious repercussions from doing this to people. And so I was very concerned very early on.
What about you, Sean? Did you have any pushback early on?
Yeah, Philip, my pushback, I was heard, meaning there were people that were able to listen. My platforms weren't taken away. I really was not very, I really didn't feel censorship really come down on me pretty tough until the vaccine movement came out. That was probably when it hit really hard. I still had platforms. I was being heard on Twitter. I was being heard on Facebook. I was being heard on LinkedIn. But when the rollout of the it's actually a compliment to call it a vaccine, the rollout of the COVID-19 injection, when you saw that roll out Anybody who opposed that, at that point, the accounts were shut down. Any posts that you posted they weren't just labeled as today people are labeled as misinformation or fact checked or whatever. There were messages that were just completely removed and pulled down. And I noticed that really starting to occur when the injections started making it into market.
Straight away, once you say injections rather than a vaccine, you would straight away, even now, that may cause some problems. Who wants to explain why you say that without getting us into trouble?
Well, I think it's a personal question, Philip. I really do. I think, look, I'm the user, which means that I not only gain all the risks, but I also gain all the benefits. So I'm sorry, I don't think people define vaccine for me. I think that I, as a public health professional, empower people to define vaccine for themselves. And I don't want somebody telling me what a vaccine is. I want to say to somebody that, to me, a vaccine is something that has demonstrated safety. It doesn't bring a risk to me. Florence Nightingale, one of her famous quotes is, "A hospital should do no harm to the patient who is there." And I'm sorry, safety is critical. That's number one. And number two, effectiveness is critical, meaning if you're going to stick something into the population, a human population, hopefully you'd see a reduction in both incidence and prevalence, number of new cases, number of existing cases. And if you don't, then one would have to assume that maybe it's not working. So as a consumer of a product, the definition, in my opinion, of a vaccine is, number one, it is safe, not just now, but throughout my lifespan. And number two, it actually works. It keeps its promise. That, to me, is the definition of what a vaccine is. And I think every consumer has the right to define it for themselves.
Interesting. And your thoughts, Jennifer?
Well, that's an interesting perspective. But, scientifically, we define a vaccine as a preventive. Meaning something you take before you get sick in order to prevent you from becoming infected with that agent. So it's not something you take after you've been infected and recovered. It's like really interesting to me, the fact that apparently the whole field of viral or immunology just disappeared overnight when they rolled these out. So we knew immediately, look, they rolled them out December 2020, starting in January of 2021. I started monitoring VAERS. I think I even contacted Sean at the time, and I was like, have you seen this? Like in January of 2021, we were already seeing adverse events being reported to VAERS, and the deaths count started, which was very disturbing. And we also started monitoring so-called breakthrough cases. And I think that's a serious misnomer, because they knew that these injections were not going to prevent infection or transmission of this virus. And so therefore, it's not a vaccine.
Interesting. Now, one of the things that I think a lot of people would argue about, and even now, again, you have to be careful with asking the question, because there is major concern among public health. And this is an important point, because the booster uptake is very low. And so because there is a major push, now we're going into winter, they're having a surge of cases. The public health wants people to therefore get their vaccine booster. And the question then becomes, both from a public health point of view, if you have a situation where, for whatever reason, your bosses decide that this is the best way to go, what responsibility do you have as a public health participant in this system in order to support whatever decisions they've made?
Phil, but if I can, first and foremost, there's something that you said really struck me and bothered me as a public health professional. Public health does not tell people what they want them to do with their bodies. Public health actually empowers people to do what they feel is best for their bodies. And public health is also the source that people, we give them the information so that they can determine what is best for themselves and their families. Public health cannot assume what is best for anyone and everyone. And when it does, it is wrong to do so. And so in your statement, if you want to get a booster, I think public health needs to be a place where you can go to get it. And if you don't want to get a booster, I think public health needs to be the voice against getting it. And what I mean by that is we serve the general public. That's our customer. We don't tell the general public what to do with their bodies or with their lives. And that's where we made a huge mistake during COVID, is doing that. What we do is we give them good, sound information in a way that they can understand it and allow for them to make the decisions that are best for themselves and their families. That is what public health does. Public health doesn't dictate what people need to be doing, certainly not with a booster or a COVID-19 vaccine or any other medical procedure for that matter. So again, I throw that out there as we continue to talk about this, because as a public health professional, if you wanted a booster, I would advocate for you to get that. And if you didn't, I'd advocate for you not to. Either way, I would be a source of information for you to make a decision that's going to be right for you and your family.
That's excellent. Yeah, that's excellent. And very important point, because at the moment, interestingly, at the moment, public health seem to have moved into that position because they're actually not saying much at this point. The information is out there. There's no longer any push or any mandates. And actually, I am worried that they're almost too silent, in the sense that if there are risks, because we seem to be going into another surge of COVID-19, does it mean anything? If it doesn't mean anything now, did it mean anything before? Was it a mistake before? Is it, any thoughts about that, Jennifer?
Well, I think the one issue I have is it's to call these a booster. I don't even know what they think they're boosting. If they don't provide immunity that's going to protect somebody from getting infected in the first place, and it's very, very clear as day by now, then why are these even still being used at all? They're trying to use it as a therapy, as a treatment, but it's not really treating anything. And you've talked about this before, Philip, about how it's skewing the immune response, how we're skewing things towards tolerance, and that's a serious, serious issue. And I had this discussion, I think, with Sean at one point, and I was like, if these public health professionals don't understand the technology themselves, they don't have the depth of knowledge and understanding of immunology and vaccinal immunity, how can they be expected to even educate the public when they themselves don't understand it?
It's a good point.
Good point, yeah. And it raises some serious issues with where we are now. Because, well, my perspective is that I don't think COVID is a virus that should be played with. I don't think it's a simple coronavirus like a normal cold virus. The stuff this virus can do is like nothing I've seen before. And so when you think about it now, because the only option available for public health is booster vaccines, because they have killed any other option for any early treatment, any other antiviral. Paxlovid has failed. The version I can't remember the other one doesn't work. The only thing they've got at the moment in their toolkit is a booster vaccine. Have you ever seen a situation like this, Sean, where there are no options?
Well, I think that that's the saddest thing that I saw during COVID. I've had the privilege of working on the front lines and in outbreaks with Doctors Without Borders and where physicians are practicing, and literally they're practicing medicine. They have the creativity and the ability to practice medicine and do whatever it's going to take to save their patients. Philip, there are several options for treating patients today. Those options are not discussed because they label you as a conspiracy theorist, or they label you as somebody who may be misinformed. But I can assure you that there are plenty of safe options. That's one thing that, and again, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not prescribing anything, but I will tell you this is something that really bothered me. When we were talking about the vaccination and we were talking about other potential treatments, ivermectin was being explored. And again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to tell you anything about that. But what I am going to tell you is this: When people started calling that a horse dewormer and criticizing people who were taking this medication, that is an award-winning medication that has multiple uses beyond parasitic, by the way. The reality is that as a public health professional who's been taking it for years, because I was using it for malaria prophylaxis safely, public health was giving it to me when I was going to countries that had malaria that were endemic. So public health had been prescribing that drug to me for years. Now, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it became unsafe. It became unworthy of even an option for patients that were deathly sick. And I'm sorry, I've seen medicine practice on the front lines with things like Ebola, cholera. I can keep going. I've seen doctors throw anything and everything, even trying to get their patients to eat bananas so that their potassium levels will increase, so hemorrhaging associated with Ebola would decrease. I've seen doctors do so many wonderful things when they can practice medicine. It drives me crazy that really, truly, the only thing that's being spoken about is the only option is boosters. I find that to be incomplete.
And Jennifer, when we think about where we are now and the fact that it seems that doctors' hands are tied, that's the reality.
I don't agree with that. I think that they've made choices. They've all made choices. And, there have been a lot of people who, for whatever reason, have put themselves first and, their careers ahead of their role in terms of serving people and not doing any harm. So I understand what you're saying. I understand where you're coming from, Philip, in terms of the dangers of this virus. And I've said this before, all this human intervention has done has prolonged things and made it far worse. So we have never been in this position before because we've just never done this before with an infectious agent. Never before have we denied early treatments. Never before have we injected people with a product that is toxic and continue to do so. We have damaged people. We have disabled people. And I think I've said this a few years ago, which I can't believe it's still a few going on. We need to pivot to talk about how we can treat those people who have been injected, because you see it yourself as a clinician, the damage that has been done. And I think the problem isn't giving a booster. It's now, how can we go back and fortify the immune system for all of those people? What can we do to strengthen that? Because it has been damaged so severely.
No,
And I'm sorry, Philip, if I could say one thing too.
Yeah.
Jennifer said we have never been here before, and she's right in a lot of aspects. However, I would disagree that the swine flu vaccine in the United States in the 1970s, going into the Reagan era, and really led to the development of legislation with the VAERS. If you just go to YouTube and type in 60-minute swine flu review, it goes all the way back, and there's a 60-minute documentary on there where the government very much pushed a vaccine that injured and hurt a lot of people, which led to a lot of distrust in vaccine manufacturing today. So I think we've been there before. I don't think it's been as bad as where we are today.
Well, I agree with that. But again, when have you ever taken a supposed vaccine for 4 injections in 1 year to prevent?
100% agree.
We've never done that before.
Yeah,
ever.
100%.
And without having the knowledge of what that's going to do to people.
Yeah.
And I said that we don't know the risks of this injection and the long-term effects. And now we're starting to see that. And people are still ignoring that. And I think that's where the danger lies, Philip, is the ignoring, as you say all the time, the elephant in the room. We can't afford to do that anymore. And the other thing that I think, is disturbing is that I was asked this recently about something I wrote in 2021. And I said, the thing is, do I stand by it? Everything that has come out since then, all the data, all the peer-reviewed publications, all that has come out since then all it has done is strengthened everything that I said then. So we talk about ivermectin being a horse dewormer. FDA has now had to remove that from their website, and they're now they're touting it as a great cancer treatment, right. In fact. So that's the most disturbing thing to me, is all the gaslighting that has happened and all that censorship and all the fact checking. And now it's like, oh yeah, you were right in the first place. And I think Sean and I kind of joked, when the vaccines first rolled out, we said, 5 years from now, we're going to see commercials like, if you or a family member were injured by a COVID-19 vaccine, call our law firm. We joked about that. And it's just, that's the disturbing part, is seeing all those things that I said then now coming to fruition and being proven correct.
Yeah, these are some serious times. And one of the groups that I think, and I'm interested to hear your perspective from a public health point of view, is that we knew that there were people who were suffering from injuries after vaccination. And one of the problems that Facebook had to apologize about is that those groups were censored on social media. So they were not allowed to speak out about that concern and that issue because it could have driven vaccine hesitancy, which is true. In your experience, can you in any way understand from a public health point of view where you may not want people to be talking about issues that could damage what you are doing in terms of your work?
If you want to change public health to public dictatorship, then fine. You can, call it that and give master's degrees in that. You get an MPD in public dictatorship. Look, the first thing I learned during the days of HIV, Philip, and there is a lot of similarities here with HIV and COVID. Because the government got involved in HIV. People who were HIV positive and dying from AIDS became political pawns in this country, and the government used them politically. And that was a huge compromise to public health. As we saw in COVID-19, again, public health did not take the lead. It was political narratives, healthcare doctrines, big pharma. They were driving it. Public health was in the back seat, letting them drive. The only time that I feel that public health becomes a dictatorship is truly when you have, for example, I think there's two occasions in the United States where public health becomes a regulatory agency. They're regulating agents in laboratories that are considered select agents, and the other aspect is when people are coming into the country, they get checked, and if they have a case of tuberculosis or syphilis or other type of public health threats, they're treated before they're released. But the point is I don't believe public health is a regulatory service. I believe public health is we serve the general public. We identify the threats, we communicate them clearly, we give people solutions, and we do what we can to serve them the best that we can. Again, there are some people that disagree with that, and I can respect that. But that isn't, in my opinion, public health. That's public dictatorship. That's the way I see that.
Any thoughts, Jennifer?
I mean, I would certainly agree. I mean, I chuckle, but public health is supposed to partner. It's supposed to be a partner. So walk beside those people. And there are very valid concerns. So what we're supposed to do is listen to their concerns, and help advise what is going to be the best option. So these are your options. These are things you can think about. These are some directions you can go. And again, not everybody has the same health concern. I know me better than anyone. I've been with me my entire life, and no one else has. And no one in CDC who's never met me and never talked to me can dare to even know what is going to be best for me. And so I think it's very arrogant to say that they know what is best for the public and what's going to be, and I still am disturbed by this public safety. It was never a public safety issue, public health issue. If we really wanted to talk about public health, let's talk about health. Let's talk about chronic obesity and chronic health issues like heart disease and diabetes. And why is that running rampant in our country? And, RFK Jr. is a big advocate. And he actually was censored very recently for talking about the poison that is in our foods and how that is destroying the health of young children. And he got censored for that. So if you really, really want to talk about health, let's not talk about shooting some toxic product into my body. Let's talk about health and what really is health and how we can really get healthy as a nation, because we in this nation, we are 4% of the global population and take 75% of all the drugs. America has supposedly the best healthcare system and the worst health outcomes. That is the most disturbing thing to me, is during this entire pandemic, we didn't talk at all about health. Not at all. We shuttered people in their houses. We kept them from going outside in the sunshine and getting fresh air, and closed gyms so they couldn't exercise, closed beaches, closed hiking trails, closed parks where a lot of people go to exercise. So, it's not about health. It hasn't been about health. And this one size fits all, constantly pushing these things, they're still ignoring the real problem.
Philip, if I could say one more thing, I'd like to jump in here, because one of the things that attracted me to public health, 27, 28 years ago, was that public health was a voice for the people that had no voice. During HIV, the stigma associated with HIV was so strong that families would turn their backs on their own family members and let their children die alone. And public health was right there at the bedside of those individuals. When nurses would not touch hands without gloves, we were the ones without gloves holding hands. And one thing I'll never forget, and I still have a picture. I wish I could run and get it. It's all the way upstairs. But one of my favorite pictures in public health is Princess Diana picking up that baby who had AIDS and making the frontline newspaper. That was huge. That was public health. She was a voice for the people that had no voice. And that's what public health is supposed to be. Not the ones that are over publicized, but like you said, the vaccine injured, public health was supposed to be their voice too.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the big outcomes of this, and I try and highlight it regularly, is the fact that we have seen a 30% fall off in trust in doctors in the past 4 years. It was up to 71%. It's now down to 40% in 3 to 4 years. So the decisions that were made by politicians, by public health, have had a direct impact on the way that the patients will view their doctors. Is that fair?
So what's really interesting, based on my experience, I think I've talked a little bit about my hearing with the Department of Health in Hawaii last year. And the reason that I was discharged from my position was because they were concerned that information that I had put on social media was actually the reason why the public health trust was broken. And I just chuckled to myself, because I'm like, the 7 people who saw my post on LinkedIn is the reason that trust has been destroyed and damaged. The problem is that people were not being given all the information, and our side has largely been silenced. And so you can't effectively inform public health and inform the public if you're silencing one side of the debate and one side of the issue. That is not that is not effective. And we're talking about censorship, because people really needed to know the level of fraud and corruption that was going on in order to really understand. Because I think the problem was that people, lay people, and I've been told this a lot, is like, well, I don't know who a trusted source is. They just didn't know anymore. Who is a trusted source? Who do I even listen to? How do I know that source is actually valid?
Philip, this is where, I don't blame the doctors for practicing healthcare doctrines. Jennifer wants to hold them accountable, and I agree, accountability does need to keep. This is very frustrating for me. I, as you can see, I have an MPH, CPH behind my name. I'm not a PhD like Jennifer is, and I'm certainly not an MD like you are. The general public assumes that they can trust medical doctors, and medical doctors, with that responsibility, they bear a tremendous amount of responsibility. Can you tell me why an OBGYN thinks that they actually are competent in infectious disease? They probably don't even know what a lipid enterovirus is, much less what infectious diseases are. Now, if I had issues with birthing or other issues, maybe you would go to see an OBGYN. But to assume that all MDs have the stage and credibility during a pandemic situation, that's just ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. And there were many doctors, many MDs that took that spotlight, that opportunity, and they had no formal training in infectious disease. They couldn't tell you the difference between droplet transmission and airborne transmission. They had no platform. They had no reason to even be up on a platform educating individuals.
I mean, a lot of those doctors don't even know PCR and how PCR works, and they don't even understand the results. I had to explain to them the results. A lot of doctors don't even understand the diagnostic tests they're using. And, and like you said, giving out prescriptions and like, just here's a pill, take this, go home. I told somebody they were looking for an infectious disease doctor as an expert. And I said, the thing is, if it wasn't for us, the PhDs, they wouldn't have drugs to prescribe. We're the ones who look at the mechanism of the disease and where we might be able to impact that and what kind of drug would do that. So we're the ones who do the drug development and make the drugs that they prescribe. We're the ones who design the vaccines and test the vaccines that they inject into people's arms. So who knows better? Somebody who actually has worked in research as a PhD. I don't mean to like insult you, Philip, but doctors are meant to just memorize things and then spit out a drug on their like little pad of paper and send people on their way. And I've had that experience very recently.
Well, Philip, I believe in doctors. I believe in the practice of medicine. I really do. But I also believe in practicing in a very humble way. And doctors do have their lanes, and they do have their specialties. And to have seen credibility be given to MDs that had no formal training in infectious disease was very frustrating, since for the last 27 years of my life, that's where I've been and that's what I've served. To have to tell a doctor that I was taking ivermectin for malaria prophylaxis, and have to talk to them about that and inform them that is a use for that drug. That was very scary to me, that they considered themselves a COVID expert, but had never known that ivermectin was used prophylactically for malaria prevention. It blows my mind.
But there were doctors who were using remdesivir and had no idea the mechanism of action of remdesivir. And I was like, do you not understand how it works? Oh no, explain it to me. Yeah. You're giving it to patients and you have no idea how it works. I think
you just got to stay in your lane. I really do. And it's hard, because when you have a lot of people knocking at your door and they're calling you an expert, it feels good. And you want to help your patients and you want to help people. But sometimes not having all the information and not being accurate can actually hurt rather than help.
It's been a very challenging time. And I think that the only thing that I would say with regards to COVID, because I've come across that issue with regards to infectious diseases and so on, very, very quickly, when I looked at COVID, I realized that this was not fitting the typical pattern of a normal respiratory virus. There was so much, as I said, the cytokine, the autoimmune responses that were occurring would suggest almost this was where it got very complicated. Was it infectious diseases? Was it respiratory? Was it rheumatology? Was it immunology? And in fact, it was a combination of all of those together. That's what probably made it so complicated and makes it so difficult for people to understand the trajectory, not just of where it was, but where it is going now as it continues to circulate in a situation where populations are immune primed. So we have some huge challenges ahead of us. And one of the problems I have now is that public health has gone silent. They have nothing else to say. And so everybody is just fine. What happens now?
Well, I find this very interesting because I don't know if you saw recently, Pfizer has now come out with their own like telehealth system. So Pfizer now wants to do direct sales to patients. And I just indulge me here a second. The good CEO, Albert Bourla, quote, "Research shows that many people in the US are overwhelmed by the abundance of online health information, especially when they are already ill, have questions, and need to make the best decisions for themselves and their loved ones." So yay, Pfizer's going to come to the rescue, and Pfizer's going to help inform people about health and how to make the best decisions for themselves. What could possibly go wrong? I kind of suspect that the only products that they're going to push on people are going to be ones that they have, hey, they have on their shelf.
Yeah.
It,
Any thoughts, Sean?
Philip, it's a hard question because I teach public health. I teach 5 classes at the academic and university level, and it's a very tough day in my opinion in public health because we've almost been trained to lean heavily on healthcare and big pharma as our practices, and that's just not the way that when I was coming up, that was not the way we learned public health. I'll just give you a classic example. Let's talk about mental health because it's a huge issue worldwide. Before big pharma made its position on the scene, if someone came to us, which they did in public health, and said, I'm suffering from depression or anxiety, the very first question we would ask them is, well, have you lost somebody you love? What's going on in your life right now? Any catastrophic situations? And if they did have them, we would jump immediately into coping mechanisms. Okay. The second question, if they said no, was, well, are you exercising at all? And if they said no, then we would formulate exercise strategies to try and get them exercising. If they said yes to that, then we said, what are you eating? A lot of sugar? Because sugar is one of the biggest mood swingers out there. How's your diet? Okay. And then when we get past that, we would then go into, what about your job? Are you miserable at your job? Is your job, how's that going? And then the next question was, what about relationships and boundary setting? Do you have healthy relationships, and are you setting your boundaries? And we empowered people to take ownership of their health. And I feel now what's happening in public health is we're teaching public health professionals to have their people surrender themselves to either pills from big pharma or healthcare doctrines from healthcare, and not do the due diligence they need to do to actually empower themselves to own their own personal health and their own personal health outcomes. And I think I don't know where public health is going to go. I really don't. I'm so tired of seeing public health professionals pat themselves on the back and say they did a great job during COVID, because I disagree with that. They did not do a great job. They did not represent the people they served. And the way that you know that is exactly what you said, Philip. If I ask people, did trust in public health increase or decrease as a result of COVID? And when the answer is that it decreased, nobody likes it, nobody believes in it anymore, that's an indicator that you've let your customers down, that you have served poorly. So I don't think you've done a great job.
Here's an important question on that, because I have a feeling that either the scientific and medical community is unaware or they are ignoring this fact. You're seeing coming out regularly in peer-reviewed major journals all the benefits that have occurred because of vaccination. It literally can save anything, stop strokes, heart disease. It's remarkable what it is able to do. How it's a serious question now. So if the public health professionals are reading these peer-reviewed papers, they have got to believe that anything they hear that is not in line with what is being published is misinformation. Is that unreasonable?
Jennifer, I don't want to take the platform. You go for it. One of the things that I'm teaching Philip right now is how to dissect peer-reviewed journal articles, because I'm sorry, they aren't what they used to be. You don't go to the abstract, you don't go to conclusions. The first thing you do in peer-reviewed articles is you look at who funded it, and you look at the limitations that the author declares. And if nothing strikes you as odd or rare there, then maybe spend some time reading it. But if you look at the funding and the limitations, and there are serious red flags, the peer-reviewed process, in my opinion, is compromised today as well. And Jennifer, I throw that up to you. That's my opinion. It's not what it used to be.
No, I agree. I mean, the very first thing I do when I get a journal article or look at the conflict of interest, oh, this person works for Pfizer. I'm not going to read past the abstract because I already know that it's going to be biased. And I was asked this question recently too about a statement in the conclusions and the discussion of journal article. And I said, that's where the author is just opining. So this is how they this is just their opinion on on the conclusion from their research. So what I would say is just look at the results and the data, and that's the facts. That's the facts, not what's written in the introduction, not what's written in the conclusions. So I would agree. And there was actually something recently I saw, one of a top cardiologist, I believe, who has now been found guilty of fraud. So publishing, falsifying data, and there's so much of that's going on now. Making up data to get published. In science, it's publish or perish. So if you're not publishing and putting things out routinely, then that puts your career in danger. And again, all the funding comes from where? NIH, government.
Majority of it. And so what's going to get published is primarily what the funders want to get published.
There's a great book about this called The Truth About Drug Companies, written by Dr. Marcia Angel. And she was the editor of a top medical journal, I think New England Journal of Medicine. And she wrote this book and explains very clearly how the system works and how the industry works. And this was published in 2014. So this has been going on for a very long time.
Yeah, it is hugely challenging at the moment. And my view is that what has happened in the COVID pandemic, it has unmasked what actually was happening all along.
Yes.
And the conflicts of interest and the financial directives. And it means that we have to almost go back to square one with regards to what it is that we think or do. Needs almost a whole revamping of the whole system. But how is that possible if the same people who led us down this path are still in a position to lead us down the next path?
Right. So we definitely need to, I've said this before, uncouple the money from the decision makers. So you can't have the agencies that are regulating these companies being paid by those companies. It simply cannot happen. And I think a great analogy that I came across was, you get a nail in your tire and you take your car to the shop to get the nail out of your tire. So, oh, great, they fixed your tire, the nail's gone, you drive out, you think, oh, you're so grateful, they helped you, they fixed. And then you come to find out that these people who own the tire shop are actually the ones throwing the nails out in the street.
And I love that analogy. And Philip, to me, there's another aspect and another piece. I agree 100% with what Jennifer is saying. But, in the United States, people need to understand the system that they're in. I'm not asking them to hate it, but they need to know it. The president of the United States appoints the director of CDC, of major health organizations. And so that means that politics is directly influencing research and directly influencing public health. And that needs to change as well. Again, if we're serving the people of this country, then in my opinion, we should have a fair and unbiased and very balanced approach to make sure that every single person in this country has a voice to be heard.
I'm going to ask an important question that I don't know if any of you know the answer to. But currently, based on the financial structure that has happened in the pharmaceutical industry and the investments that were made, especially with regards to mRNA technology, lots of shareholders could lose a lot of money if these companies are unable to produce at the quantities that they anticipated. And you have to remember that the COVID booster vaccines would have been maybe biannual products. And so it raises the question that if there is that need to be able to drive the financing, is this possibly what is leading to all of these new random, it seems, pandemics just appearing out of nowhere and disappearing? First it was bird flu, then it just seemed to disappear. Now it's monkeypox. That it's just quite unusual to say the least. Any thoughts about that? That's probably a bit too conspiratorial.
Well, no, I don't think so. It was interesting to me because I was asked early on why mRNA, and I thought that was an interesting question. But my response was I suspected that they hadn't been able to get mRNA through FDA approval, and I suspected that if they could get the mRNA through EUA and they could show how great it was, they could save billions of dollars in the marketing and the production and the safety testing, and look, it was done at taxpayer expenses. So yay, good for Pfizer and Moderna. And then now we can say, oh, it works so well, we can try it for all these other things. So now it's becoming the drug of choice. Drug companies, they're all like similar drugs, similar drugs for the same disease. So that's how they make patents so no one else can copy what they're doing. But then they have like knockoff drugs, and there's actually very few innovative drugs out there. And so now they're going to say, oh, we can use mRNA for flu and for RSV and for, they're actually moving into the animal health market. And I've seen mRNA for rabies for dogs and companion animals, and they gave mRNA to zoo animals. They're really trying to like get this as far and wide as they can to support themselves. Now that they were in the gold rush and they want to keep that going. So I don't think that every single vaccine platform works for every single disease. And so saying that we're going to use mRNA as the cure-all for everything is just, it's going to be a disaster, in my opinion.
Philip, I work in the high containment industry, and there are reasons why we have high containment labs. Number one is the things that Mother Nature throws at us that we don't expect. And there's a history of that. In fact, monkeypox outbreaks in sub-Saharan regions of Africa have historically been on the books. I mean, go look at Google Scholar and search those. There are outbreaks that happen. Mother Nature throws curveballs at us all the time. The scary part is if we think for a single second that someone out there who wants to do something nefarious with microbiology, whether it be virology or bacteriology or whatever it could be, did not notice or take note of what happened during this pandemic. We're crazy. The need for biodefensive science and research, in my opinion, has grown substantially as a result of what we witnessed in COVID. And however, I do think that there are several things that need to be reflected upon and modified and regulated and changed for the betterment and for the protection of the general public.
Yeah, these are some challenging times ahead. And one of the worries is that with patients losing so much trust in their doctors and than otherwise, what impact does this have on the management of other diseases?
I'll tell you this: I'm very scared because we did cry wolf. So we cried wolf. There may be a disease one day that we all should hide from. This was certainly not the one. This was far from it. And there may be a disease one day where we may want to stick ourselves with something we don't know is safe. Meaning, you're looking at a death rate of 50, 60, 70%. But this was not the one. So to me, we cried wolf. And it's going to be very hard to convince people to take the same type of movement or stance, at least in this generation. I think this was, some people will say, well, no, this is a priming exercise. No, I think this was an exercise for people to resist the next time something comes around, because I think they will at a pretty substantial level.
Any thoughts, Jennifer?
I have a lot. This whole situation has really made me take a few steps back and reflect on things. And I know that Sean and I've had this conversation, and I've worked in biocontainment laboratories, and I've done the research, and I manage a biocontainment facility. And now you brought up bird flu and monkeypox, and there's been this whole discussion around the research. And I knew when this happened that they were going to come after the virologist eventually. And sure enough, now we're looking at gain of function research and the dangers of gain of function research. And do we really need to be doing this research? And, you know, as a virologist, you know, just because we can doesn't mean we should. And, you know, let's just talk about monkeypox for a moment. You know, monkeypox has been around for a really long time. And, you know, even when I think about MERS, supposedly comes from camels. And you think about the people who live in that region have used camels for hundreds and hundreds of years. They have relationship with these animals to survive. And why suddenly in 2014? Why all of a sudden did this become a problem? It's very curious to me. Where did it come from and why then? And, you know, when we think about monkeypox, it's been around for a really long time. Even Zika, decades, never been such a big problem. And then all of a sudden it's a big problem and then it disappears. So it's really intriguing to me. And so I think we need to really think about the research that's being done, really look at the rationale for the research that's being done. You know, Bernie Moss, monkey around with monkeypox. So apparently there's clade 1 and clade 2 of monkeypox, and clade 1 is supposedly more transmissible than clade 2. And Bernie had decided to take genes from clade 2 and put them on clade 1 and see what would happen. But then he decided to do the opposite. Let's take clade 1 genes and throw them in clade 2 and see what happens. And there's apparently congressional investigation into that gain of function research that has been largely ignored. And this all happened kind of around the time that monkeypox emerged. So it just, there's a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions around the research and what's being done and really why it's being done and if it really needs to be done.
You make an important point there, because I've always said that one of the biggest risks with regards to the COVID pandemic was the fact that we didn't clarify the source of SARS-CoV-2. You know, some people may say that, you know, it was natural origin. You know, the FBI says that it was gain of function from a lab. My concern is that you just have to think about it logically. If it was, and even if it is a tiny possibility that it was from a lab, but if it was from a lab and those people who created it recognized that they got away with it then, almost certainly they would do it again.
Philip, and Jennifer, you tell me, you're a virologist as well, but Philip, anybody who thinks this is of natural origin at this point and at this stage in the game, that theory is, it's almost just absolutely ridiculous. Jennifer, you agree on that? I mean, there is no natural host for SARS-CoV-2. This is
I mean, like I said, it's made me really think about, it's really made me take a few steps back and think about things. And, you know, they've tested over 90,000 different animals and not one has had SARS-CoV-2 in it, but they want to say it came from an animal host. You know, I even think about Ebola. I used to read about Ebola when I was in high school. I used to love reading about that, the outbreaks in Africa. And I used to that was what I wanted to do. I dreamed about going to the jungles of Africa and finding the natural host of Ebola. And to this day, we still don't have the true natural host of Ebola. You know, people throw bats under the bus all the time. And that's something I actually think I'm going to take a deep dive into and look at. Why do we blame bats for everything? Bats live in cages, in caves, underground, away from large populated areas. Why are we always throwing bats under the bus? And like, why are bats responsible for all these infectious diseases? Because we just seriously can't find anything else to blame it on. So it's very curious, and it's something I really want to dive into and think about a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, I had no doubts before, and I have never doubted that this virus originated from a laboratory. However it came out, it came from a laboratory.
I would say, I mean, I'd say there's a backbone in nature, but definitely played with and modified to a certain degree, no doubt. no doubt.
I mean, like you talked about, Philip, the things that this virus can do, the way, as a scientist, it's fascinating. The ways that the spike protein interacts with different cell types, with the endothelial cells, with the myocytes. It's so fascinating as a scientist to see all the things that this virus and these proteins can do. It's amazing. There's no way that this was natural.
Where did it evolve? I mean, how did it evolve? It doesn't just start somewhere like that and evolve into what it is and enter a human. I mean, we also keep in mind that one of the things that was really a big precursor to this universal vaccination program was also that it was in several different hosts, so that we had never seen before. USDA came up very early on and said that they were seeing SARS-CoV-2 in deer populations, those types of populations. So you have novel hosts even in the animal population. So again, if you want to use science, I think the question today now is use science to defend that it comes from a natural host. Because if you tried to do it that way, you flip the argument around. At this point in time,
it's speculation.
The argument is moot. It really is. I mean, I'm not a scientist. I can't give you the direct science and claim for certain that it. But I just at this point, if you flip the argument around and say, prove to me that it is from a natural host, the evidence is just not there.
But it now raises that very serious question. This is why I'm saying, where is the responsibility with regards to public health? Who is responsible for asking and pushing these hard questions? It's not going to be the politicians. It's not going to be the medics because they don't, they're not so involved. And so the public health should be concerned about this kind of pattern. Why are they not pushing for those answers in order to protect the public health?
Well, based on my experience and what I gleaned from everything that I went through, public health was given money. I've said this many times. They were given money to put out certain messages, and they were afraid that if they didn't put out those messages, they would lose that money. And that's from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, I think also too, we have a pandemic, Philip, of absentee leadership. Individuals who are more worried about what they would stand to lose for their positions than to step up and say the things that need to be said. There are public health leaders right now who are saying what you're talking about. Former CDC director, I think I want to say Redfield, I think is his last name, Dr. Redfield.
Robert Redfield. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's saying some of the things that we're saying right now. And I'm sure he's getting severely beaten up for saying those things. I mean, keep in mind that directors of major public health and health agencies usually get cushy jobs within big pharma upon retirement from the government. But because they don't say those things and they don't come out and attack the system. But there are public health individuals out there that are assuming leadership roles. And it's not, again, about bringing public health down. It's not, again, about damaging public health. It's really about truth and transparency and being open and honest with communication so that people, again, can be empowered to make the decisions that are right for themselves and their families. They have to understand the system that they're living in. And if they can, then they can make better decisions.
As we come to the end here, guys, I think the big concern still for many people is, what do they do now? Where do they go? Who do they trust? Is everything over? Is it there are just so many questions and so little answers that are available. I'm just for a moment, as we close, going to ask each one of you, as we put you in charge of all of this, what do you do? How do you engage the public at this point with regards to what's happening? Who wants to take that first?
Ladies first. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Oh, put me on the hot seat. Someone once told me that when you're running for office, you don't just have your own agenda. So the point is to go out You got to knock on doors. You got to talk to people. You got to ask them, you know, like what their concerns are. What are the needs of the community? Those are the things that now I, as a representative, need to work for and need to fight for. So I think number one, first and foremost, is acknowledge the lies, acknowledge that you lied, acknowledge that you screwed up. And then second, listen. You have to ask the questions and you have to listen to the people that you are meant to serve. You have to listen to them. And number three is you can't silence the opposition. That's just authoritarian. Like Sean said earlier, you know, if you want public health dictatorship, that is just authoritarian. You can't silence one side and say, like, this is the information, this is all you need to know to make an informed decision. You have to listen to both sides, and you have to be able to sort out what of that is actually valuable. I want to just, again, if you'll indulge me, I received this card from somebody in 2022. And I thought it was very interesting because, you know, throughout this, they said those of us who, you know, you're spreading misinformation and malinformation and you're damaging public trust and you're causing people to be disabled and die. And we were the ones that were the problem. But I received this card from somebody, and I keep this and I read it every now and then. Hopefully I don't cry, Philip. So this was somebody I knew in elementary school and I haven't talked to in decades. Though it's been decades since seeing each other in person, memories from childhood are amazing. You will always be the brightest person in the room. Sorry times are rough, but I would like to thank you for being so courageous in these times. You gave me strength when I almost caved to the vaccine. I'm grateful that I recovered from COVID-19 and not give in to the pressure. It's so important. It's so important to be able to have both sides have a voice.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jennifer. And Sean?
I think, you know, I tell my students today that I feel sorry for them. That I have empathy for them. You know, back in my day, Philip, I'm older, and I think we share maybe the same generation. We were lucky when we got in a family fight to have an encyclopedia to reference, and those arguments would go on forever. It's equivalent to the days when we were growing up. There were maybe 3 types of peanut butter on the shelf, and now there's 200 million peanut butter qualities on the shelf. Meaning, when people are out there searching for information, they're so inundated with information that they are overwhelmed and they have no idea where to go and who to trust. And that's sad because we have to empathize with that reality today. They don't know where to go. They don't know what to get. I think it's important for us to begin to teach people a couple key lessons. Number one, big pharma is a business. Number two, healthcare is a business. For some strange reason, they don't see those two very obvious points. Big pharma is not there to save your life, and neither is healthcare. That is a means of earning money, but they are not your advocate. In fact, if you want to hire a patient advocate to deal with healthcare, it's probably a good idea. The same goes with big pharma. I think the key message is just to continue to educate and empower people to become good users of information, to understand the difference between good quality information and information that is biased, and to be a free thinker like you are, Philip. You have been a free thinker from the beginning of this. You have not been, you've been attacked, you've been censored. Jennifer, you've been attacked, you've been censored, you've held your ground. The reality is, whether we're right or wrong, it doesn't matter. We've all been hurt. And the saddest part about the whole thing is that all we've ever asked people to do is to actually just be critical thinkers, to actually not follow, but to take information, ask questions why, and make good decisions. I'll finish with this point. I think a very good point. Whenever my mom and dad asked me to do something and I said why, they would get mad or upset. And that was because they weren't trying to serve me. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to control me. And if in the future anybody ever says to you, you have to do this with your body, whether it be a physician or a politician or a public health professional, and you say why, explain it to me. and they get mad, that is a sign that they are not there to serve you. They're there to control you. And I think that's a very, very important distinction, because if someone is there to serve you, they're interested in what you want to do with your body, not what they want you to do with it. Okay.
Brilliant, brilliant. Wow. As I said, I have been wanting to get both of you together for the longest while because I knew that the insights would be so powerful. So thank you both very much for being here with us. Thank you for sharing those insights. Thank you everyone for being with us. Remember, if you're interested in some of the stuff we're doing, look in the description and make sure that you click on like, subscribe, and notify. And remember to join our members club, where we'll be able to share more information. But thank you both. I'll ask you to wait for me while we do the outro. And thank you to the audience for being here with us. Have a
Great.
great evening.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you so much for being part of the solution.
Thank you.